Have you ever seen the light fade from a soul forgotten? This is Ranger, a loyal companion cast aside and labelled a danger to all. Moments away from a tragic end, his story seemed over, but a single message on a worn collar changed everything. Please don't give up on me, Alex. In a town shadowed by fear and judgment, can one dog's past hold the key to redemption, or will it be too late to save him, and the man who needs him most? Morning rain fell softly over Little Creek, a quaint town nestled among rolling hills shrouded in mist. The town's animal shelter, an aging building with weathered walls and an unassuming charm, bustled with the sounds of barking dogs and meowing cats. Inside, Dr. James Carter, the shelter's dedicated veterinarian, began his morning rounds. James had always found comfort in the quiet moments before the shelter opened to the public. It was during these early hours that he could connect with the animals, often discovering their hidden personalities when no one else was watching. Today, however, there was an unusual weight in the air, a feeling James couldn't quite place. "Morning, Dr. Carter," called Sandra, the shelter's coordinator, as she walked past with a clipboard in hand. "Got some files waiting for you on the new arrivals. Oh, and there's something you might want to check out in the back kennel." James nodded, his mind already racing ahead. He worked his way through the rows of cages, greeting each animal with gentle words and a soft touch. A tabby cat pawed at his hand through the bars, while a beagle wagged its tail enthusiastically. But as he neared the last row, he felt a chill run down his spine. There, in the far corner of a dimly lit kennel, sat a golden retriever. Its golden fur was matted and dull, and its posture was both tense and defeated. The dog's soulful brown eyes followed James's every move, not with aggression, but with an almost pleading intensity. James glanced at the clipboard hanging on the kennel door. His heart sank as he read the bright red stamp, "Euthanasia scheduled." "Ranger," he murmured, reading the name on the sheet. Underneath the notes were grim. Aggressive behavior during intake. Bit handler. Not adoptable. Sandra appeared beside him, her face lined with concern. "He's been here for 3 weeks, James. Bit one of the handlers when they brought him in. We've tried everything, but, well, you know how these cases go." James frowned. "Doesn't look aggressive now," he said softly, observing Ranger's calm demeanor. The dog's eyes remained locked on his, filled with an unspoken plea. "That's the thing," Sandra replied. "He's quiet most of the time, but during intake something must have set him off. We can't risk adopting out a dog with a history of biting." James hesitated, then knelt down by the kennel door. He studied Ranger closely, noticing the subtle twitch of his ears and the way his body remained tense but not threatening. Slowly, he reached for the latch. "James!" Sandra warned, her voice sharp with worry. "You know the rules." "I know," he said, his tone steady, "but something doesn't add up here." Ignoring Sandra's protests, James opened the kennel door and crouched low, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. Ranger didn't growl or retreat. Instead, the dog leaned slightly forward, his nose twitching as if trying to read James's intentions. "Hey there, buddy," James whispered. "What's your story?" As he reached out a hand, James noticed something hidden beneath Ranger's thick fur, a worn leather collar. Curious, he gently parted the fur around the dog's neck, revealing a metal tag. His fingers trembled slightly as he read the engraved message, "Please don't give up on me, Alex." James froze, his mind racing. The name, the message, it felt deeply personal, almost like a cry for help. He looked back at Ranger, whose eyes seemed to plead with him. "Alex," James repeated softly. "Who's Alex?" Sandra sighed. "James, we can't delay this any longer. The paperwork has already been processed. If we don't—" "Wait," James interrupted, his voice firmer than usual. "This dog isn't just another case file. There's a story here, and I'm going to find out what it is." Sandra hesitated, then shook her head. "You've got until noon to figure it out. But if the board finds out, I'll take full responsibility, James said, standing up. Can you check if we have any records of an Alex connected to Ranger? Sandra nodded reluctantly and headed toward the front office. James remained by the kennel, his hand resting lightly on Ranger's head. The dog leaned into his touch, his tense posture easing slightly. "You've been through something, haven't you?" James murmured. "But we're going to figure this out." Back in his office, James sifted through the shelter's database, cross-referencing the name Alex with Ranger's intake records. Nothing. Frustrated but determined, he turned to the local newspaper archives. Hours passed as James searched, his coffee growing cold beside him. Just when he was about to give up, an article caught his eye. "Local Veteran Service Dog Missing After Storm." The headline made his heart race. He skimmed the details. Alex Carter, a former military handler, had lost his service dog during a severe thunderstorm that hit Little Creek 8 months ago. The dog, described as a golden retriever with a distinctive golden coat, had been presumed dead after weeks of searching. James sat back, stunned. The description matched Ranger perfectly. He felt a surge of urgency and hope. Could Ranger be the missing dog? And if so, where was Alex now? Later that day, Sandra returned with a skeptical look. "Nothing in our system about Alex, but if you're really going down this rabbit hole, you'll need more than just a hunch." James nodded. "I found an article about a missing service dog. The timeline matches. I'm taking him home for observation." "James, that's against protocol," Sandra said, exasperated. "Then file it as an extended evaluation period," he replied, already reaching for Ranger's leash. "If I'm wrong, I'll take the heat." Sandra sighed deeply, but didn't argue further. She watched as James carefully leashed Ranger, who stood calmly by his side, his posture almost regal. As James walked Ranger out of the shelter, the dog's steps were steady but cautious, as if unsure of what awaited him. James glanced down, his resolve hardening. "You're safe now, Ranger," he said quietly. "We'll figure this out together." The rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Little Creek glistening under a pale grey sky. For the first time in weeks, Ranger's tail gave a small wag. It wasn't much, but for James, it was enough to believe that this was only the beginning of something far greater than he could have imagined. The sound of soft rain tapping on the roof accompanied the quiet hum of James Carter's laptop as he worked late into the night. Beside him, Ranger lay curled on a blanket, his golden fur catching the warm glow of the desk lamp. The dog seemed calmer than when James had first brought him home, but his occasional restless movements hinted at a past filled with turmoil. James sighed, rubbing his temples. The article he had found earlier about the missing service dog haunted his thoughts. Could Ranger truly be the dog from the story? And if so, what had happened to Alex Woods, the soldier who once depended on him? The faint sound of a door creaking broke James's concentration. Emma appeared in the doorway, holding a steaming mug of tea. "You're still up?" she asked, setting the mug on the desk. Her curious blue eyes darted toward Ranger, who opened one eye and thumped his tail lazily in acknowledgement. "Couldn't sleep," James admitted. "I found something earlier, a missing service dog story from 8 months ago. The description matches Ranger." Emma's eyebrows rose. "A service dog? That would explain why he's so well behaved, despite what the shelter records say." She pulled up a chair beside her uncle. "What else do you know?" "Not much yet," James admitted. "But I have a name, Alex Woods. He was a veteran, and Ranger, if it really is him, was his partner." Emma leaned closer, intrigued. "So, where's Alex now?" "That's what I need to find out," James said, opening a tab for the Little Creek newspaper archives. "Help me dig." For the next few hours, the two worked together, piecing together fragments of information. Emma had always been good with research. Her natural curiosity and knack for details made her invaluable during moments like this. "There's not much on him," Emma muttered, scrolling through old headlines. "Wait, here's something." She pointed to the screen, excitement in her voice. Local veteran rescues children during flood. James scanned the article. It described Alex Woods as a decorated military handler who had recently returned to Little Creek after his service. During a severe thunderstorm, he had helped rescue several families stranded by rising floodwaters. His service dog, a golden retriever named Shadow, had been instrumental in locating those trapped in the flood zone. "Shadow," James murmured, glancing at the sleeping dog nearby. "That must have been his name before Ranger." Emma nodded, her voice soft. "They sound like an incredible team." The article went on to describe how, in the chaos of the storm, Shadow had gone missing. Alex had spent weeks searching for his dog, but as the days turned into months, hope had faded. The article ended on a somber note, mentioning that Alex had withdrawn from the community after the loss. Why would he just disappear? Emma wondered aloud, leaning back in her chair. If Ranger, Shadow, was so important to him, why give up? James shook his head. It's not that simple. Losing a dog like Ranger, it's not just losing a pet, it's losing a partner, a lifeline. That kind of grief can break a person. Emma frowned, her fingers drumming on the desk. So, what do we do now? If Alex is out there somewhere, shouldn't we tell him that Shadow's alive? First, we need to confirm that Ranger really is Shadow, James said. There might be military records or certifications we can track down. Emma's eyes lit up. The nearest Veterans Center might have something. If Alex worked with them or registered Shadow as a service dog, there could be a record. James nodded. It's worth checking, but we'll need to be careful. If Alex has been avoiding contact with the outside world, there's probably a reason. The next morning, James and Emma drove to the Little Creek Veterans Center, a modest brick building tucked between two rows of maple trees. The air smelled fresh from the night's rain, and the leaves shimmered under the pale sunlight. Inside, the receptionist greeted them warmly. "How can I help you?" James explained their situation, being careful not to reveal too much. "We're trying to locate a veteran named Alex Woods. We believe he may have been partnered with a service dog named Shadow." The receptionist frowned, typing into her computer. "I'm not sure how much I can share, but let me check if we have anything on file." She disappeared into a back office, leaving James and Emma waiting in a quiet corner. As they sat, Emma looked around the room. Framed photos of veterans lined the walls, along with plaques commemorating years of service. A photo caught her attention, a younger Alex Woods, standing tall in his military uniform with a golden retriever at his side. "Uncle James, look," she whispered, pointing to the picture. "That's him." James stood and examined the photo closely. There was no doubt in his mind. The dog in the photo was Ranger. The same golden coat, the same intelligent eyes, and even the distinctive patch of white fur on his chest. The receptionist returned moments later, holding a thin file. "I found something," she said, handing it to James. "But it's not much, just basic registration information for Shadow. It confirms he was a certified service dog under Alex Woods." "Does it say where Alex might be now?" James asked. The receptionist shook her head. "I'm afraid not. He hasn't been in contact with us for months." Disheartened but not defeated, James thanked her and left the center with Emma. Back at home, they spread out everything they'd found on the kitchen table: the articles, the registration file, and the photo from the Veterans Center. Ranger sat nearby, watching them with a calm intensity, as if he understood the importance of their work. "So we know this much," Emma began, organizing the papers. "Ranger is definitely Shadow, and he was Alex's service dog. But we still don't know why Alex hasn't come forward or where he is now." James stared at the photo of Alex, his brow furrowed. If he's still alive, he's probably dealing with more than just the loss of Shadow. Veterans like him often carry a lot of hidden scars. Emma nodded solemnly. "But if we could find him, maybe knowing Shadow is alive would help." James reached over and scratched Ranger's ears, earning a soft wag of the dog's tail. "The question is, where do we start looking? He's had months to disappear." Emma bit her lip, deep in thought. The storm happened near the outskirts of town, right? If Alex hasn't left the area, he might be somewhere nearby, maybe living off the grid. James considered this. It's possible. We'll start by asking around. Someone in town might have seen him. Emma smiled, her determination shining through. We'll find him, Uncle James, for Ranger's sake and for Alex's. James nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. As he looked at Ranger, he couldn't help but feel that the dog had been waiting for this moment, a chance to reunite with the person he had never stopped searching for. The morning sun bathed Little Creek in a soft golden glow, but James Carter felt none of its warmth. He and Emma sat at the kitchen table, sorting through the notes and files they had gathered about Ranger's past. Despite their progress in uncovering his story, one looming obstacle remained: the community's fear of the dog. "Uncle James," Emma began hesitantly, "if we tell everyone what we've found, do you think they'll listen?" James sighed, his fingers tracing the edge of a newspaper article. "Fear is a powerful thing, Emma. Even if we have proof, it's hard to change minds that are already made up." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Ranger's tail thumping against the floor. The dog sat by the door, looking at them with his usual calm intensity. James smiled faintly. He deserves better than this. We owe it to him to try. Later that afternoon, James and Emma took Ranger to the local park. It was a bustling weekend scene, children laughing as they played on the swings, parents chatting on benches, and the occasional jogger weaving through the paths. Emma held Ranger's leash tightly, conscious of the wary glances from some of the park-goers. Among them was Linda Jenkins, a longtime resident of Little Creek, sitting stiffly on a nearby bench. Her sharp grey eyes followed every move Ranger made, her disapproval radiating like a storm cloud. "Look who's here," Linda said loudly to a friend beside her. "That's the dog everyone's talking about. Dangerous, they said. And here it is, right in the middle of the park." Emma tensed at the comment, but James placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Let's just focus on Ranger," he said. "He hasn't done anything wrong." Emma nodded, but her grip on the leash tightened. She guided Ranger toward a quieter area of the park, trying to avoid further confrontation. The dog walked obediently at her side, his posture relaxed but alert. The tranquility didn't last long. A sharp pop echoed across the park as a balloon burst near the swings. Ranger's ears perked up, his body tensing as he scanned the area. At the same time, a young boy on the swings lost his balance and slipped, tumbling sideways. Before Emma could react, Ranger bolted forward, his leash slipping from her grasp. "Ranger, no!" she called out, her heart pounding. The dog raced toward the boy, his movements swift and purposeful. Parents gasped in alarm, some rushing to pull their children away. Linda Jenkins stood abruptly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "That dog's attacking!" But what happened next silenced everyone. Ranger positioned himself beneath the falling boy, cushioning the child's landing on his broad back. The impact knocked Ranger to the ground, but he quickly stood, his eyes scanning the boy for injuries. The child, unharmed, clung to Ranger's fur, his tearful face buried in the dog's golden coat. Emma ran to the scene, her voice trembling. "He's okay! Ranger saved him!" The boy's mother rushed over, scooping her son into her arms. "Thank you," she whispered to Ranger, her voice choked with emotion. "You're such a good boy." But not everyone was convinced. Linda marched over, her face red with anger. "That dog is dangerous. It shouldn't be in public, let alone near children." James stepped forward, his tone firm but measured. "Ranger didn't attack anyone, Linda. He reacted to a dangerous situation and protected that boy. If anything, he's shown the kind of training and instincts we should be grateful for." Linda crossed her arms, her lips pursed. "I don't care how it looks. That dog has a history and we can't just ignore it." Later that evening, back at home, Emma paced the living room. "Uncle James, we have to do something. People like Linda won't believe Ranger unless we prove it." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We need evidence, something concrete that shows what really happened today." Emma's eyes lit up. The park has security cameras. If we can get the footage, it'll show everyone exactly what Ranger did. The next morning, Emma and James visited the local community office, where the park's security footage was stored. After some convincing and an explanation of the incident, they were allowed to review the recordings. "There," Emma said, pointing at the screen as the video played. It clearly showed the moment the boy fell from the swing and Ranger's quick response. The dog's actions were deliberate and protective, not aggressive. James leaned back in his chair, a small smile of relief crossing his face. This is it. This is what we need. Armed with the footage, James and Emma organized a meeting at the town hall that evening. The room was filled with curious and skeptical residents, including Linda Jenkins, who sat near the front with her arms crossed. James stood at the podium, his voice calm but resolute. "I know there's been a lot of fear and uncertainty about Ranger. Today, I want to show you the truth." He gestured to Emma, who played the security footage on a projector. The room fell silent as the video unfolded, showing Ranger's heroic actions in vivid detail. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd as they watched the dog protect the boy with unwavering precision. When the video ended, James addressed the crowd. "This is Ranger, a dog who was labeled dangerous, misunderstood, and discarded. But today he proved that he's anything but. He's not a threat. He's a protector." For a moment, the room remained quiet. Then the boy's mother stood, her voice breaking with emotion. "Ranger saved my son. I'll never forget that. He's not dangerous. He's a hero." Scattered applause broke out, growing louder as more people joined in. Linda Jenkins, however, remained seated, her expression unreadable. As the meeting concluded, James and Emma felt a small sense of victory. But as they walked out into the cool night air, James sighed. "We've made progress, but not everyone is convinced. Fear doesn't vanish overnight." Emma looked down at Ranger, who walked calmly beside her. "Then we'll just have to keep proving them wrong, one step at a time." James smiled at his niece, her determination reminding him why they were fighting so hard for Ranger. "You're right, and as long as Ranger's with us, we'll keep moving forward." Overhead, the stars began to peek through the clouds, a quiet reminder that even in darkness, light could always find its way through. The early morning light filtered through the trees as James and Emma loaded the last of their supplies into the truck. Ranger sat in the back seat, his golden coat glowing in the sunlight, his eyes fixed on James as if sensing the importance of the journey ahead. The previous night had been spent poring over maps, articles, and reports from locals who had mentioned spotting a man living in isolation near the edge of Little Creek's forest. Everything pointed to one possibility: Alex Woods, the missing veteran, was still alive. "Do you think he'll even want to see Ranger?" Emma asked as James started the engine. James sighed, gripping the wheel tightly. "I don't know. Losing someone like Ranger, it can leave scars, but we owe it to both of them to try." The drive to the forest edge was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As they turned onto a narrow dirt road, Emma unfolded a map marked with red X's, places where locals had reported sightings of Alex. "This must be the area," Emma said, pointing ahead. The road grew rougher, flanked by towering pines that cast long shadows. "If he's out here, he really doesn't want to be found." James nodded, slowing the truck to a stop near a clearing. "We'll go on foot from here. Stay close and keep an eye on Ranger." The trio began their trek through the dense forest, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. Ranger walked ahead, his nose to the ground, occasionally glancing back to ensure James and Emma were following. The dog's focus was sharp, his movements purposeful. "Look," Emma whispered, pointing to a faint trail leading deeper into the woods. "Someone's been here recently." James inspected the trail, noting the scattered footprints and remnants of a fire pit nearby. "We're close. Let's keep moving." After an hour of hiking, the trees opened to reveal a small, weathered cabin nestled in a clearing. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and a stack of chopped wood leaned against the cabin wall. It was a simple, solitary existence, exactly what James had expected. "Do we just knock?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James hesitated, his gaze fixed on the cabin. "Let's give Ranger a chance first." Unclipping Ranger's leash, James gave the dog a gentle nudge forward. "Go on, boy." Ranger approached the cabin cautiously, his tail wagging low, his ears perked. The sound of a door creaking open froze everyone in place. A tall, weathered man stepped into the doorway, a walking stick in hand. His face was lined with years of hardship, and his sharp green eyes scanned the clearing before landing on Ranger. For a moment, the man seemed to stop breathing. "Shadow," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Ranger barked softly, his tail wagging faster as he took another step forward. The man's expression hardened and he took a step back. "No, you shouldn't be here." James stepped forward cautiously. "Alex Woods, my name is James Carter. I'm a veterinarian from Little Creek. This is my niece, Emma." Alex's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" "It's not about what we want," James said gently. "It's about him." He gestured to Ranger, who was now sitting patiently, his gaze fixed on Alex. "I believe you know him as Shadow." Alex's grip on the walking stick tightened. "I lost him 8 months ago, and now you're here. Why?" James hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "He was brought to the shelter. He's been through a lot, but he's still the dog you trained, the dog who hasn't stopped looking for you." Alex shook his head, stepping back into the cabin. "You don't understand. I failed him. He deserves better than this." Ranger whimpered, his ears drooping as he watched Alex retreat. "Alex," Emma spoke up, her voice soft but firm. "He never gave up on you. Don't you think that means something?" Alex froze in the doorway, his shoulders slumping. For a moment the silence was deafening. Then, slowly, he turned and knelt, his gaze meeting Ranger's. The dog stood, his tail wagging hesitantly as he approached. When he was close enough, he pressed his head against Alex's chest, his body trembling with excitement and relief. Alex's hands hovered in the air before finally settling on Ranger's fur. His breath hitched and his voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, boy. I thought I'd lost you forever." Tears streamed down Alex's face as he buried his face in Ranger's neck. The dog responded with soft whines, licking Alex's cheek as if to erase the months of separation. James and Emma watched from a distance, their own eyes glistening with emotion. Inside the cabin, the air was warm and filled with the faint scent of wood smoke. Alex sat on a worn armchair, Ranger lying at his feet, his head resting on Alex's leg. The man seemed lighter, though his eyes still held the shadows of his past. "I searched for him for weeks after the storm," Alex admitted, his voice low. "When I couldn't find him, I gave up. On him, on myself. I couldn't face anyone after that." James nodded, understanding the weight of Alex's words. "It's not too late to make things right. Ranger's here now, and so are we." Alex looked down at Ranger, his hand absently scratching behind the dog's ears. "He's different now. Quieter. Like he's seen things I wish he hadn't." "He has," James said. "But he's still the same loyal dog you trained. He never forgot you." Emma leaned forward, her voice gentle. "You don't have to do this alone, Mr. Woods. We can help." Alex looked at them both, his expression softening. "I don't even know where to start." James smiled, one step at a time. That night, as the first stars appeared in the sky, Alex sat on the porch of his cabin with Ranger by his side. For the first time in months, the burden on his heart felt lighter. He glanced down at the dog, who looked up at him with unwavering loyalty. "You waited for me," Alex murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for not giving up." Ranger wagged his tail, his presence a silent promise that they would face whatever came next, together. The soft glow of morning sunlight spilled across the Little Creek Animal Shelter, casting long shadows on the freshly painted walls. The usually quiet facility buzzed with activity as volunteers carried supplies and set up decorations for the shelter's newest initiative, Hope Pours. James Carter stood near the main entrance, clipboard in hand, watching as his niece Emma directed a group of volunteers. At her feet, Ranger sat calmly, his golden coat gleaming in the sunlight, his presence both reassuring and inspiring. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," James said, glancing down at Ranger. "You've become the face of something much bigger, haven't you, boy?" Ranger wagged his tail in response, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the anxious, misunderstood dog James had first met at the shelter. The idea for Hope Pours had taken root shortly after Alex and Ranger's emotional reunion. Seeing the impact of Ranger's story, James and Emma were inspired to create a program dedicated to helping animals who had been labeled difficult or dangerous. The goal was to provide them with rehabilitation, training, and ultimately, a second chance at life. The program quickly gained momentum, with residents of Little Creek rallying behind the cause. Even those who had initially been skeptical, like Linda Jenkins, began to see the potential for change. Linda Jenkins stood near a table covered with pamphlets, watching as families wandered through the shelter's new training area. Her sharp grey eyes softened as she observed a group of children laughing while petting a playful Labrador. She turned to James, who was busy greeting visitors. "I have to admit," Linda began, her tone hesitant, "I wasn't sure about all this at first, but seeing how Ranger has changed Alex and how this program is helping others, maybe I was wrong." James smiled warmly. "It takes courage to admit that, Linda, and it means a lot coming from you." Linda nodded, her gaze drifting to Ranger, who was sitting patiently near Emma. "He's not what I thought he was. None of these animals are. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to believe in them," James said. "That's what Hope Pours is all about." Meanwhile, Alex Woods stood at the edge of the training area, watching as a group of volunteers worked with a rescued German shepherd. The once reclusive veteran had begun to find his place in the community again, thanks in large part to Ranger and the support of James and Emma. Alex shifted uncomfortably as a few townspeople approached him, their expressions kind but curious. One of them, a young mother named Carla, spoke up. "Mr. Woods, I just wanted to say thank you. Your story, it's inspired me and my kids to come volunteer here." Alex glanced down at Ranger, who nudged his leg encouragingly. He managed a small smile. "It's not just my story," he said. "It's Ranger's too. He's the real hero." Carla beamed. "Well, we're glad you're both here. This program is going to change so many lives." As the day went on, the shelter hosted workshops, training demonstrations, and meet-and-greet sessions with the animals. Ranger was the star of the event, his gentle nature drawing people of all ages to him. Emma took the stage to address the crowd, her voice steady and confident. "Hope Pours was born out of the belief that every animal deserves a second chance. Animals like Ranger, who was misunderstood and almost lost to us, have so much love and potential to give. All they need is someone to see it." The crowd erupted into applause, and Alex, standing in the back, felt a swell of pride for both Ranger and the young woman who had become such an integral part of his journey. As the event wound down, James found Alex sitting on a bench near the shelter's garden, Ranger resting at his feet. "Big day," James said, taking a seat beside him. Alex nodded, his gaze distant. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this again." "You've been through a lot," James said gently. "But look around, Alex. This," he gestured to the shelter bustling with activity, "is because of you and Ranger. Your story gave people hope." Alex glanced down at Ranger, who looked up at him with unwavering loyalty. "I still have days where I feel like I don't deserve this," Alex admitted. "But seeing the good that's come out of it, it's helping." James placed a reassuring hand on Alex's shoulder. You're not just helping yourself, you're helping others heal too. That's something to be proud of. By evening, the shelter was quiet again. Volunteers cleaned up the last of the decorations, and James and Emma locked up for the night. As they walked to the parking lot, Ranger trotted happily beside them. "Today was a success," Emma said, smiling. "I think Hope Paws is going to make a real difference." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It already has." Ranger barked softly, as if in agreement, his tail wagging in the cool evening breeze. In the distance, Alex stood near his truck, speaking with Linda Jenkins. The two shared a handshake before Alex climbed into the driver's seat, Ranger leaping in beside him. As James and Emma watched them drive away, they felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Hope Paws wasn't just a program. It was a promise that every life, no matter how misunderstood, deserved a chance to heal and find its place in the world. And for Alex and Ranger, it was a promise that had already begun to bloom. The air in the Little Creek Community Center buzzed with excitement as townsfolk gathered for the much-anticipated fundraising event for Hope Paws. Banners with pictures of rescued animals decorated the walls, and tables were lined with baked goods, crafts, and donation jars. At the center of it all was a small stage where Alex Woods, once a man hidden from the world, now prepared to share his story. Ranger sat quietly at Alex's feet, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Alex's nervous fidgeting. James Carter and Emma stood nearby, offering reassuring smiles. "You've got this," Emma whispered. "Just speak from the heart." Alex nodded, though his hands tightened around the edges of the paper he'd prepared. He glanced down at Ranger, who looked up at him with unwavering trust. That small connection steadied him. The room fell silent as James stepped onto the stage to introduce Alex. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight. Hope Paws was born out of a belief in second chances, for animals and for people. Tonight I want to introduce someone who embodies that belief. Please welcome Alex Woods." The crowd applauded as Alex stepped forward, his movements stiff with apprehension. He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Ranger. "When I first came to Little Creek," Alex began, his voice steady but low, "I didn't plan on staying. I didn't think I had a place here, or anywhere really. I carried a lot of guilt, a lot of pain. But then something happened that I never expected." He paused, his hand resting lightly on Ranger's head. "I found him, or rather, he found me again." Alex's story unfolded with raw honesty. He spoke about his years in the military, how Ranger, then named Shadow, had been his partner and protector in the field. He shared how Ranger had saved lives, including his own, and how the two of them had formed an unbreakable bond. "When the storm came, I lost him," Alex said, his voice cracking. "I searched for weeks, but he was gone, and I blamed myself. I thought I'd failed the one being who had never failed me." He paused, the weight of those memories heavy in the room. "So I shut myself off. I thought it was better that way. But then, months later, he came back into my life, and it was like he never gave up on me. Not once, not even when I gave up on myself." The audience listened intently, many wiping away tears as Alex described how Ranger had helped him confront his guilt and find hope again. "Ranger isn't just a dog," Alex continued. "He's a reminder that even when we feel lost, there's still someone or something out there waiting to bring us back." He gestured to the room, his voice growing stronger. "Hope Paws isn't just about saving animals. It's about saving people, too. These animals, they've been through so much, just like many of us, but with patience, love, and understanding, they can heal. They can teach us how to heal." When Alex finished, the room erupted in applause. Many stood clapping and cheering, their earlier skepticism about Hope Paws replaced with a sense of unity and purpose. Linda Jenkins, who had once been one of the program's loudest critics, stood near the back, tears streaming down her face as she joined in the applause. Emma ran up to Alex as he stepped off the stage. "That was incredible," she said, beaming. "You really reached them." Alex looked around at the smiling faces and felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. "I just told the truth," he said, his hand resting on Ranger's head. "It's his story as much as mine." As the evening continued, donations poured in. Families signed up to volunteer, children played with the shelter's animals, and several rescues found new homes. The fundraiser surpassed its goal, ensuring that Hope Paws could expand its reach to help even more misunderstood and traumatized animals. Linda Jenkins approached Alex toward the end of the event, her expression softer than he had ever seen. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice trembling. "I was wrong about Ranger, and about you. What you said tonight, it's changed how I see things." Alex nodded, his voice gentle. "It's never too late to change, Linda. Thank you for being here." She smiled, reaching down to pat Ranger's head. "You're a good boy," she said softly. "I can see that now." As the event wound down, James, Emma, and Alex stood near the stage, watching the community come together in support of their cause. The room was filled with laughter, conversation, and hope, a stark contrast to the fear and doubt that had once surrounded Ranger. James clapped a hand on Alex's shoulder. "You did it, Alex. You showed them what Ranger's story is really about." Alex looked down at Ranger, who wagged his tail happily. "We did it," he corrected. "All of us." That night, as Alex drove back to his cabin with Ranger by his side, he reflected on how much his life had changed. The guilt and isolation that had once consumed him felt lighter now, replaced by a sense of purpose. "Ready for another adventure, boy?" Alex asked, glancing at Ranger. The dog barked softly, his tail wagging as if to say, "Always." For the first time in years, Alex felt truly at peace. Together, he and Ranger had not only found their way back to each other, they had also found a way to bring hope to others. The morning sun rose over the dense forest surrounding Alex's cabin, its golden rays spilling through the pine trees and illuminating the wooden porch. Inside, the once solitary cabin bustled with life. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the sound of laughter and the soft padding of Ranger's paws as he moved from one room to the next, his tail wagging in contentment. Alex stood by the kitchen counter, slicing fresh bread. His movements were steady and relaxed, a stark contrast to the tension that had once defined his days. He glanced at the dining table, where Emma was sketching out plans for the next Hope Paws event, and James was flipping through a binder of shelter records. "This place sure has changed," Alex said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. James looked up from his work, nodding. "It's more than a cabin now, Alex. It's a home." The transformation of Alex's cabin into a welcoming refuge had been gradual but deliberate. What had once been a secluded retreat was now a hub of activity and compassion. The living room shelves, once empty, were now lined with books on animal behavior and framed photos of rescues who had found new homes through Hope Paws. The yard outside had been turned into a training area, complete with agility equipment and shaded resting spots for animals. Visitors from Little Creek and beyond came regularly, seeking guidance, solace, or simply a moment of connection with the animals. At the center of it all was Ranger, the dog who had once been labeled dangerous and abandoned. His gentle presence reassured nervous animals, comforted grieving visitors, and inspired everyone who met him. One crisp autumn afternoon, a young couple arrived at the cabin with a timid border collie named Daisy. The dog cowered behind her owners, her wide eyes darting nervously at every sound. "Thank you for seeing us," the woman said, her voice tinged with worry. "Daisy's been like this ever since we adopted her. We don't know what else to do." Alex knelt down to Daisy's level, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "She's been through something, but she's lucky to have you," he said gently. "Let's see what we can do." Ranger approached slowly, his posture relaxed and his tail wagging low. Daisy watched him cautiously, her ears pinned back. Ranger stopped a few feet away, lying down and resting his head on his paws. It was a silent gesture of trust, and Daisy, after a long moment, took a tentative step toward him. The couple watched in awe as their nervous dog began to relax in Ranger's presence. "How does he do that?" the man asked. Alex smiled, his hand resting on Ranger's head. "He knows what it's like to be scared, and he knows how to show others they're safe." Over time, the cabin became a symbol of second chances. Alex hosted workshops for shelter volunteers, training sessions for adopted pets, and even quiet retreats for veterans dealing with trauma. The once closed doors were now open to anyone in need of help or healing. Emma thrived in this new environment, her passion for animals growing stronger with each passing day. "I never thought I'd feel so at home here," she admitted one evening as she helped Alex clean up after a busy day. "But this feels like where I'm meant to be." James smiled, watching her with pride. "You've got a gift, Emma, and you're using it to make a real difference." One weekend, the team organized an open house event at the cabin, inviting the community to see the work they were doing. Families arrived with their children, eager to meet the animals and learn more about Hope Paws. Linda Jenkins, who had become an unlikely ally, stood by a table of adoption brochures, chatting warmly with visitors. "You know," she said to one mother, "I was the first to doubt this whole program, but seeing what they've done here, it's changed my life." Alex watched from the porch, his heart swelling with gratitude. Ranger sat beside him, surveying the crowd with his usual calm. The dog had become a local legend, his story inspiring countless people to believe in the power of second chances. As the sun set and the last visitors left, Alex, James, and Emma sat around the fire pit in the yard. Ranger lay at Alex's feet, his eyes half closed in contentment. "This feels good," Alex said, his voice low but steady. "For the first time in a long time, it feels like I'm where I'm supposed to be." Emma smiled, leaning forward to scratch behind Ranger's ears. "You're not just where you're supposed to be, Alex. You're helping so many others get there too." That night, as Alex stood on the porch looking out at the darkened forest, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Ranger stood beside him, his steady presence a reminder of how far they had both come. "You've changed my life, boy," Alex said softly, reaching down to stroke Ranger's fur. "And now we're changing lives together." Ranger wagged his tail, his gaze fixed on Alex with unwavering trust. Together, they had built something beautiful, a new beginning, not just for themselves, but for everyone they had touched. As the stars twinkled above, Alex stepped back inside, the warmth of the cabin wrapping around him like a promise. This was no longer just a place to hide. It was a place to heal, to grow, and to spread compassion to all who entered.